Wonderful to see you all. Today we'll be discussing how Africa can build resilience to withstand external shocks to trade and health. And this is really a follow-up to our earlier discussions, including at the IMF World Bank Spring meetings, where we talked about, the trade, sharp rise in trade tariffs and implications for Africa, and official development assistance decline and its implication. So today we'll look a bit in depth at it, and we will have also the privilege of having our African financial institutions. My TDB will be making intervention on how they can help, AFDB also, so we can look not just at the analysis and the challenges, but also how we can address it, and with the help of our financial institutions. So without further ado, I'm hoping that the team will load the presentation on the screen, but I know that you have meetings, so let me start. We will start first looking at the implications of higher tariffs on Africa. And here there are three areas that we will look at. The first one is the issue of the bilateral tariffs, and we've seen that the US imposed a 10 percentage point increase on existing import tariffs that was effective April 5th. And then we also saw the reciprocal tariffs that were also imposed on 60 countries, 20 of which are African countries. And this was supposed to be effective April 9th, but it was paused for 90 days. And I'm hoping that the slide will come up on the screen. And when it comes, you will see that basically before April 5th, the applied tariffs, the trade weighted average tariff on US imports from Africa was below 1%, was basically 0.7. After this 10 percentage point increase, we now have 7.1% tariff, which is higher actually than the tariff that is imposed or used from African countries on US products. And basically we have more protectionism from the US than Africa to the US. However, if we end up after the 90 days with the same reciprocal tariffs, the trade weighted average will be 15.8%. So it's 2.5 times even what we have now, which is already multiples of what it used to be. I'm not sure what is happening with the slides, team. Okay. Please. And then moving further, if we look at a country level, we will see that 30 countries are now facing higher tariffs on their exports than they are actually imposing on imports from the US. You would have seen that country by country, hopefully soon. And 19 out of the 30 countries are eligible for AGOA. So anyway, basically the second area is AGOA. And here, as you know, AGOA was designed to promote African exports through duty-free access to the US. However, now its future is in limbo, with implication for eligible countries, and particularly few countries, some of the countries that will be highly affected, along with specific sectors. So just to put it in perspective, while AGOA, benefits, were limited overall, the benefits were relatively to few countries and in a limited range of products. So that increase in closure or the suspension of AGOA will have implication for these countries that benefited most from it, like South Africa, Kenya, Madagascar, Lesotho, Cote d'Ivoire, and particularly those basically that have any like higher value added manufactured goods. And the reason is because there is an exception that is made for oil products that for those that used to export oil, they are, they will not be affected. The issue here is that it exactly hits what Africa is trying to divert from. So it makes it much more difficult to export the higher value added, the manufactured goods than before. Okay, next. Okay, and I mean, in the earlier slide, it really showed kind of, the benefits in terms of, where the most of the AGOA benefits ended up to the oil sector, and then some, kind of across other higher value added, but the vast majority was actually in oil and gas. And on the other hand, it shows countries and the size of the trade that was ongoing with them. Next slide. Overall, the increased tariffs will have a negative impact on growth, but particularly in terms of the impact on exports, it's expected that it's going to be 8% as of now, with the 10 percentage point increase. However, if we end up with a scenario where we end up with all these reciprocal tariffs that have been announced going forward, it means that there is an impact on exports of a decline of 21.5%. And as you can see, if you look at a sectoral level, it really hits, agribusiness and industries. Next. I think some of the things that we'll need to look at is basically, trade-related impacts at country level. It will be uneven. So you have a set of countries, the ones in the red zone. These are the countries that will be the ones most affected with the existing, increase of the 10 percentage point. And here that includes Egypt, Comoros, Kenya, Mauritius, Ethiopia, Madagascar, and Lesotho. There are others that will be affected, but because these are the countries that have the high share of US in terms of country total exports and are mostly impacted by the type of products that they export, this is where we end up. However, things get even harder if the reciprocal tariffs are applied and more countries are impacted. So if that happens, you have Egypt, Cote d'Ivoire, Comoros, South Africa, Kenya, Mauritius, Ethiopia, Madagascar, and Lesotho. We'll look in a little bit into what are the implications, what type of products, and what can we do. But basically, that tells us is that the impact will be uneven. There will be significant losses. And we need to see what can be done to mitigate that. Next slide. Here, what we try to do is to look into, for these countries that are most impacted, what can we do, particularly at, intra-African trade and regional integration, how can it help? So what we looked at here for the countries that are impacted, the type of exports that this is concentrated in, and where we have the countries in Africa that are importing most these products. So if we look, let's take the example of Comoros, for example. Comoros could lose up to 88.5% of its yearly exports to the US, and 91.5% of the loss is for vanilla alone. And as an alternative market to the US, Comoros could explore exporting vanilla to intra-African markets such as Mauritius, Madagascar, South Africa, Tunisia, and Uganda. And similarly, for other products here, we went through for each one, where are the high concentration in terms of products and where other African countries are importing the same product. So that can be one way that we need to focus on. And I have to emphasize something that we've discussed during our conference of ministers, is that the nature of the trade among each other in Africa has much higher share of higher value added and manufactured goods. Okay, so the quality, even though the quantity of it is lower than the rest of the world, the composition and the quality is much better. So that's the area that we need to focus on, and that would help us not only in climbing up the value chain, but in actually increasing resilience and moving in the direction that we want to go to. Okay, then next slide. There are also other headwinds that are happening related to trade, which is basically the implication of the global context in terms of increased or trade tensions between the US and the EU and the US and China, and potential escalation on that and what it means for Africa. So on one side, that could potentially mean that you will have import diversion, where Africa could become a destination for large volumes of imports instead of the US. It could also mean indirect impact for African exports, where exports of countries like China to the US go down, and Chinese imports from Africa also decline. And that is because in a lot of times we are like, the primary inputs into many of these goods. There are also other headwinds coming from things like the CBAM, the European Union CBAM, which could further undermine African export competitiveness, particularly in higher value added, and complicate, the regional value chain development by adding more cost and trade barriers. And in terms of what needs to be done, it's basically 4 pillars. Diversifying exports and promoting value addition, deepening our intra-regional trade and building on, the AFCFTA in terms of implementation, harmonizing standards, and, removing non-tariff barriers, strengthening and building regional supply chains, and finally, of course, enhancing domestic resource mobilization. Okay. Now moving to the health side. We've talked about before the issue of the not only the decline in ODA that we've seen, announcement for on the side of the USAID of almost expected 83%, but also there are other countries that have announced similar direction. UK 28%, France 19%, Germany 26%, Belgium 14%. So that's the trend we're seeing, and there are indications that this may basically not be a temporary shock. This may be one that is there to remain. It's not, it can be basically an adjustment. For these shares, there is a concentration in certain sectors, and health is among the sectors where a substantial share of ODA has been going. Next slide. So it's very interesting here to see the total official health ODA received relative to government health expenditure. So on average, I mean, this is shocking, but on average, it almost matches. So the average is 100%. If you look here, you can find also that for 14 countries, health spending that is, ODA funded was higher than the government spending, and of which 7 was more than double. So that gives you perspective of the type of challenges that will hit that sector. Next. The landscape for health, governments have been increasing their health expenditure. However, it still remains around in the range of the 30%. Out-of-pocket spending have been declining, indicating improved access to healthcare. However, the external aid has been historically, it remains stable. And part of the challenge here is that the disease burden in terms of health bill is high in Africa, 24% of the world disease burden. 70% of global maternal deaths, 40% of global population that is affected by tropical disease, 2/3 of global population living in HIV, and children that have over 14 times more likely to die before the age of 5. So with this decline on ODA, there is a need to increase and mitigate that decline by increasing domestic spending and finding innovative way of funding that gap. Next. So basically, here I think we can skip that. Let's go to the next one. The ODA allocation, there has been disparities in disease control and funding. And there has been certain areas that have been getting more than others, but the areas of disease control and vaccines have been some of the areas that really benefited historically from ODA. Next. So this slide gives you a sense of what are we, what type of headwinds are we going against going forward? You can see that for DAC ODA for health, it's projected to decline from 25 billion to 15, okay, 40% change. For the USAID, this is expected to decline by around 90%, and that is a massive change for countries to cope with among everything else that they are coping with. Next. Here, this shows you some examples of, various countries and, what this means. Next. So basically, you can see that, one of the most affected is going to be HIV related. And this would have a significant implication for well-being, for productivity, for future growth. Okay. Now, if you look in terms of current total health expenditure, so when we say total health, it's not just the government spending, it's spending of everyone, including households. And currently, it has varied, but averages around 5.5%, and it has been historically low as a percentage of GDP. You can see here kind of, the highest and lowest in terms of health spenders as a percentage of GDP. With Liberia, Lesotho, CAR, Namibia, and Mozambique being among the highest, and Ethiopia, Benin, Somalia, Djibouti, and Congo among the lowest. Next slide. Here, if we look also, if we go beyond that to look into the decomposition of where this spending is, we will see that government, accounts, for example, in 2022 for about 41% of the total spending. And the government was the primary source of financing for health in 11 African countries, meaning that it accounted for 50% or more when we say primary. And that the out-of-pocket expenditure constitute the main source of financing in 24 countries. So that gives us also an understanding of how these cuts that we have seen will make a disproportionate impact on households and citizens in a very difficult time. Next. Looking into the per capita, the current expenditure in terms of per capita, the average for the continent is almost $250 US, and 9 countries spent on average that, and they are listed here: Seychelles, Mauritius, South Africa, Botswana, Namibia, Cape Verde, Eswatini, Libya, and Tunisia. However, as you see, there remains a large diversion across countries. Okay, let's also make sure that we have enough time for discussions and feedback from our financial institutions. Let's go to the last slide on recommendations. What do we need to do? So here, there are a number of areas that need to be prioritized, trade policy reforms, the full implementation of AFCFTA, reducing non-tariff barriers, digitalizing customs, creating regional trade hubs. And on health financing reform, really the need to embed the 15% Abuja targets into national legislations, the need to invest in having health insurance, national health insurance schemes that can mobilize contributions. As we talked many times, the need to build more self-reliance through deeper domestic resource mobilization, the need to also build regulatory capacity at regional blocks and to standardize standards so that it makes it easier for us to trade among each other. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much. Back to you. Yes.
Thank you very much, really, dear Sanan. Really for this, what this one means is that the world is changing. Aid is declining significantly, and it will continue to decline until it really doesn't contribute much. And we have seen the debt levels. We are trying to address it at the global level, but the impact on our development is quite significant. And that's why with the tariffs and other things, the focus on the Africa Continental Free Trade Area becomes very critical. And in this one, we cannot also be financing by government alone. That's why we need private sector. And for private sector to come in, we need our own financial institutions. And on this note, we call upon the TDB, the CEO, the president. He has so many titles, but let's go by the president. It's more fancy. But I think he is one of the TDB is one of the financial institutions that are contributing significantly. They have an association of the financial institutions that are helping, and sometimes we've been focusing outside the financial institutions. I think it's time now that we look at them and how they can support the private sector in terms of really investing in our own continent, in our own market. So, Mr. President, please.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Gatete, Chairman of the meeting, and good morning again to all the distinguished participants, honorable ministers. I just have one slide to speak to, and the first area of attention really is just a quick reminder to everybody in the room of why African financial institutions have always been important. Ambassador Gatete has talked about the increased importance in the current climate where we're facing a lot of new issues, new constraints, but historically it's been important in any case because there's always been a lot of classical gaps in access to finance. Even if the new shocks had not come, we would all be worried about these big gaps. And every year, every conference, we are publishing reports that remind us of how big these gaps are. The classical gaps are typically long-term because typically commercial banks cannot intermediate savings into long-term lending. That's why you have specialized financial institutions. But there's also been some recent developments, not as recent as the ODA cuts, but over the past 5 or 10 years, there's been a gradual creeping in of new blockages to access to finance. We've always had a problem of volume, the classical issue. We've always had a cost issue where we have disproportionate premiums of risk. We know even countries like Morocco, who are double B plus or double B flat, pay much more for their facilities than an equivalent double B rated country in Europe, right? So you have these disproportionate risk premiums. This is not a volume issue, it's a cost issue. But over the past 5, 10 years, you've also had new regulatory developments that have raised the disincentives to doing business in Africa. So you have a lot of global international commercial banks who historically were present in Africa, providing commercial trade finance, other types of normal commercial finance. Even they are retreating. And they're retreating not because of ODA cuts, not because of the new shifts in global policy coming out of the major power centers in the world, but they're retreating because of very quiet but very harmful regulatory practices that's cutting African financial institutions off from the global financial system. I was at an event in Washington on the sidelines of the spring meetings, and one of the big US banks was very happy to share with us that they're now coming back into Africa in a way that was quite bold for them because they had not established a strong presence. And I actually decided to be a little bit provocative, and I put up my hand and I said, sir, most of your peers are going the other way. They're exiting Africa. What is giving you the courage to come into Africa? He says, well, at least I understand that the future will be partly African. We know where the demographics are going. I have to leave something behind for my successors in the future, which was a very welcome commentary to hear from the gentleman. But then he turned around and he looked at me and he says, but you need to amplify your voice to make sure that the global regulators are not making it so hard for us to come in. Because he said, one little incident, one mistake happens, and the penalties are massive, right? So one little thing goes wrong, $5–10 billion penalty. That is the disincentive that's there now, and that's why you have KYC, you have KYCC, you have all of these difficult regulatory practices that are intended to address good things, for instance, anti-money laundering, counterterrorism financing. We all know these are evils that need to be combated, but you have very blunt regulatory approaches being taken, which have the actual effect of just literally cutting Africa off of the global financial system. So these are some of the challenges. Of course, we have long-standing issues around our banking sector not being strong enough, capital markets. We have 30 of them, but they're hardly operating, many of them. They're just there on paper, no liquidity, no activity. So we have a lot still to do with our African financial institutions, whether it's banks or capital markets, trying to encourage the billionaires to do more venture capital, angel investors. But there's also some new issues that are coming up, and I think this is very important in the context of the G20 reform discussions, the global financial architecture. The one thing Africa should be very proud of is since the millennium, our financial sectors have actually multiplied many-fold. If you go back to the turn of the millennium, many of our commercial banking sectors were very weak, and apart from the AFDB, there was hardly any other supranational African specialist banking segment that you can speak of today. And I think credit does go to the AFDB, but you have so many, AFC, TDB, Afrexim Bank. There's quite an interesting stable of supranational African financial institutions who have higher ratings, much higher ratings than our African sovereigns. These are mechanisms to deal with this issue of risk premium, because these are African entities that can go into global markets and raise money at a much lower cost. But now there's also new issues coming out of the global financial architecture where even the supranational African institutions are beginning to get cut at the knees. And this is a new development that is, again, similar to what's happening from the global regulatory context, where inadvertent consequences are arising. So we know what's happening with tier 2 banks, tier 3 banks. They have no correspondent banks. They cannot do trade. They're all struggling, and their counterparts in the major money centers in the world are saying, sorry, in the past we would be quite happy to be your correspondents. Today, you do one wrong thing, I get hit $10 billion. There's no amount of profit I can make with you to justify that risk. Systematic withdrawals. Now, the supranationals, the ones that I mentioned, who typically are investment grade, some are AAA, some are A, some are BBB. We actually represent the best of Africa's financial institutions from a ratings perspective. Now, all of a sudden, there's new creeping developments where these institutions are facing major headwinds. All of a sudden, ratings agencies are coming to entities like TDB, like AFC, like Afreximbank, and we're being told, oh, you actually have this issue, that issue, and all of a sudden you're starting to see very, very dangerous downward credit pressures, credit rating pressures coming on these institutions. For instance, there's publications of lists. 2 years ago, a list was published of what constitutes an international financial institution, IFIs. Naturally, AFDB was there because they have global shareholding. But the supranational Africans were not on the list. So credit rating agencies start calling you up and saying, you're not a supranational. I said, so what am I? Says, well, they come up with new language. You're a plurilateral. Okay, so what is a plurilateral? Nobody's heard of that. Okay, so a plurilateral means this. Okay, so now ratings agencies start saying, you know what, your policy relevance is not what it used to be. Maybe your credit ratings are too high. So now you're beginning to see headwinds coming in on the stable of supranational African institutions that in the past were the best foot forward of Africa. When we go into global markets, we have in the past been able to raise money at very affordable rates. Even us today, we are being subjected to unprecedented negative pressure from the global financial community. And it's coming not just from the ratings agencies, it's coming from global stakeholders. Trade finance historically is another area that's been a protected asset class within finance. We know there's debt restructurings in many African countries. But the one thing that everybody is very clear about is trade finance is excluded from debt restructuring. There's no controversy on that. But then some countries get hit with climate shocks. We had countries where hydropower generation came to a standstill because of droughts. And then you had copper prices in some countries collapse. And you had countries that had trade finance facilities that all of a sudden could not meet their obligations. So what did some of us do? We said, well, like the Bridgetown Initiative, where you have climate shocks, you have to be a constructive player. You step forward and you say you will reschedule the obligation. You reschedule it because the sovereign is in no position to meet its obligation. You do that, and then a year or two later, somebody comes to you and tells you, that's no longer trade finance. Well, what is it? It was trade finance that was rescheduled in the face of climate shocks, in the case of commodity shocks. Instead of holding your sovereign up by the neck and saying you must pay, we're not going to reschedule the debt, you reschedule the debt. And then all of a sudden, you're told by players that, oh, what you did was no longer trade finance. Well, what was it if it wasn't trade finance? The use of proceeds was to bring in essential commodities, fertilizer, medicine, fuel. That's what it was used for. But the reason we have these problems is because we have no voice. You have these global fora where decisions are being made about very sensitive debt restructuring issues which need urgent attention. And we have sometimes been the first to reschedule, the first to restructure debts, but because you're not in the big rooms, people don't know that you've restructured. So they come to the African financial institutions and they say, oh, you are part of the problem. You are not restructuring. We're going to do this and that and put you on all the wrong lists. I'm like, hold on. When you at the global level were debating restructuring, we were the first to restructure, but we get zero credit for it. You're not recognizing the restructuring we did, the rescheduling we've did. We've been the most constructive. We first came to the party, but then you go into the global meetings and it's like, oh, you're a holdout. I'm not a vulture fund. I'm not holding out. The other African financial institutions are not holding out. But just because people don't even care to ask you what you've done, you're labeled wrongly and you're treated wrongly. And these are things that are easier to fix, I think, because it's just because, you know, people are not consulting you. You don't have a table at these very big forums as African supranationals. AFDB does sometimes, but the rest of us don't. And I think Africa needs many horses to ride. There are too many challenges, too many gaps to be filled. African Development Bank is a fantastic horse. It is actually a shareholder of many of the supranationals. But AFDB and the ministers of finance who own the rest of the African supranationals need to also make sure that we're not being cut at the knees inadvertently, because that is another risk that is emerging on the horizon. And if things are not handled, these will be contingent liabilities coming back to roost to the shareholders of these institutions. And I think this is a subject that has not received adequate attention. It's an easier one to fix at the G20, in my view, because there are specific asset classes that there is a lot of consensus on to be protected. We've all agreed climate shocks these days are very real. If a climate shock happens, don't go hold a sovereign by the neck and say, cough up. You give breathing room. That's what we did during COVID. And even the ratings agencies, even the global regulators, were all on the same page. Let's all get on the same page. If trade finance is subject to shocks, let's reschedule it, but don't punish those who've rescheduled it. These are some of the new issues that are coming up. A lot of African sovereigns, I know, have difficulty in accessing trade finance. It's becoming a real issue, much more than in the past. And if we're not careful, even those specialized institutions that have been playing an important role in this regard are going to find themselves weakened to the point where we will no longer be able to be part of the solution. So I thought I would be provocative. You know, you need to come to these meetings and serve some good espresso so people can take action. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, really. This is something you never hear anywhere else. And what he's saying is that there are many things that have, we started with Basel III, and all the international banks left. And then there was rating. And who said there has to be only 3 rating agencies globally? Nobody. And then they call the shots. We've seen, as I mentioned, one of the biggest problems, where do you keep your reserves? It has to be AAA rating. Where do you keep your sovereigns, your sovereign wealth funds? The same thing. Pensions, the same thing. Why not keep it in our own regions? Because your rating is not good. And it will never be good. So that's the whole message you are telling us. And also, the de-risking instruments, which we know they exist, they don't come to Africa. In most of we've said it many, many times, but for them to come so that anybody can invest, it becomes a big problem. But also what you are highlighting in terms of politics, it's not only in the government institutions, it's also in the private sector. So as you rightly explained. But now we have the whole bank, our bank, the Africa Development Bank, that has been doing the best it can really under the circumstances and has managed by any means to remain AAA ratings. Yeah, I don't know how you did it, but you tell us the secret and also on how to address the issues that dear Sanan was mentioning, and also what my good friend President has just mentioned. Thank you so much. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Your Excellencies, Honorable Governors of the African Development Bank, and distinguished guests. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. And I just want to jump to what you said. So I had my talking points here, but I'm just going to respond to what I've been hearing today. And listening to you, President Tadesse, there is a lot that the African Development Bank Group can do, I think, to support you further. I mean, we've been good in creating many of the DFIs on the continent. We've been good in being anchor investors, but I think, and we've provided support in various ways. But I think that we need to go to the next steps. With the changes in the financial architecture, there's been a call for MDB to work together, to work as a system. But I think that, and we've done that. We've done great progress in that area. But I think that we need to do much more in terms of DFIs. We have a few ideas that we're talking on internally, and I think we also need to be your voices in the areas where you are, in the fora where you are not. One of the ideas or innovation that the African Development Bank has been spearheading is the reallocation of the channeling of SDR to MDBs. And the idea for us as well is that through this is not just to increase the lending capacity of the African Development Bank, but also to provide support to DFI. So that's been, from the onset, either increasing, providing more capital, equity capital, providing more support, more de-risking instruments, and so forth. So this is going to be part of the conversation. And before I go to the AAA and the rating discussions, just we know that it's a very we operate in a very difficult environment today, and we have the African Development Fund replenishment that is the second session discussion is happening over the weekend. In a context where some of the countries are saying we have to step back because of the security situation in our country. We need to do more with regards to defense, etc. So a very, very difficult context, and we're thinking internally of ideas of what to do in order to support better, to support you much better. And so these are going to be interesting discussions. There is an event that we're hosting tomorrow with, for you, all the governors of the African Development Bank, in order to discuss, the future of ADS7 and how we can, your views, brainstorming ideas, and how we can move forward. And we have some few ideas on the table as well. But, going with regards to the, something that I really like to talk about, I mean, we talk about aid, we talk about development assistance, etc. But I think the solution is in Africa, and the solution is there, and we're not doing enough in order to to get to where we need to be in terms of domestic resource mobilization. That is the answer to many of the issues that we are facing. This and the development of local currency capital markets, because why go and raise resources in dollars in Europe? I mean, the US raise resources in the US, the Europeans in Europe. Africans, we have to go into these countries because our markets do not have the depth and the breadth of the other markets. And hence, we have to go through various hoops, the rating, because remember, when you borrow in your country, you are the AAA of your country. But it's only when you go to other markets that you're rated differently. So I would urge the work with regards to domestic resource mobilization, but also to the development of local currency capital markets. And maybe last, with regard to the rating, and there's been the African rating agency that is being pushed, but at the same time, and this is something that we've heard, last year during the launching of the agency, is that it is also very important that internally at the debt management, the debt office levels, the people that look after the rating agency, that they also, take rating agency specialists. Because there is a way, we at the African Development Bank have challenged many times and won the rating agencies with regard to specific methodology, and this is something that would encourage you to do, work with specialists. But let me stop here in the interest of time.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think President had something to say about credit rating before we bring in the Minister of Finance of Zimbabwe. Can you do it quickly, please? Yeah,
yes, just one thing I omitted to say. I just thought I should give the House here something very positive to feel about, because as much as I was highlighting the challenges, I thought I should just let everybody know that the reason we have so much liquidity at TDB and facilities that are undispersed and available for member states, we have well over $1 billion and more behind that for member states to draw. That's partly because we've had strategic partnerships also with our European partners and the World Bank Group. Credit needs to be given where it's due. During the COVID shocks, when global markets went upside down, MIGA stepped into the space, gave us a guarantee, and we raised very cheap money globally. and that has supported all of our member states. And so we have a lot of capacity, a lot of facilities, but we need to protect that success, is the point that I've made. And I think the World Bank Group has joined AFDB. They've been exceptional global MDBs, supporting capital markets in Africa, supporting specialist MDBs like ourselves, but there's other global players who have not come to the party. That's the message. I think the ADB and the World Bank can be part of the UNECA and Ministers of Finance coalition to get the message through to other global stakeholders who are behind. They're behind. 30 years ago, we would have been here complaining about the World Bank. Today, I'm the cheerleader for the World Bank because the World Bank has really come around. They've done a fantastic job. There's others who need to come around, and I just wanted to focus where we need to engage as an African collective, because it has to do with Basel, it has to do with some of the committees there that don't include African supranationals, so that we cannot do guarantees, and then central banks in member states will not give credit to the guarantees that we issue. They tell you those guarantees don't count. But when other people give guarantees, they count, right? So, you know, it's these little very pernicious issues that can be put on one page, and the delegations that go to the G20 need to raise this, because when you go to Washington, you go to the IMFs of this world, you go to the Paris clubs, there's no African representation of significance there. So you say all the right things, you point out what the issues are, nobody acts on it. Nobody acts on it because you're invisible, you're insignificant. And that's why I'm just trying to sort of help crystallize some of the key points that we can all rally around and get some movement. And that will continue to enable us to step up in this environment where many in the rest of the world are stepping back. We need to step up. But for us to step up, we need to be unchained. And we need to remove some of the blockages that are emerging, new blockages. It's bad enough that we have the classical and historical blockages. There's new blockages. I just wanted to crystallize those points. Thank you, sir.
No, thank you very much. Everyone can see that if you have to bring all the financial institutions here, the frustration is real, really, and you need to do something about it. And now here we have the Minister Nkube, who used to be the chairman of the Conference of Ministers for the ECA. And while he was a minister, he tried to do 4 things at the same time: change his currency, paying debt, compensating the white farmers, and at the same time, he's a Minister of Finance. I don't know how you do that in this day and age. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you, Chair, Dr. Gatete. Let me thank the previous presenters, Anan Mosi, and Masu, and Asatu. Thank you for illuminating presentations. Let me thank you for this very timely session as well. Maybe by way of just comments, and that's how I'm going to do it, and fill in some of the, make my own comments, fresh comments. Starting with the tariffs and over-protectionism from the US, I think it's clear we've all been affected as countries. First order of business, just negotiate. Okay, that's what we are doing. We've received a response as Zimbabwe. We know where to fine-tune. We'll fine-tune and negotiate, hopefully get a deal that is favorable. So just negotiate, don't ignore it, engage. My second thing is, I agree with Hanan on the long-term solutions, medium to long-term solutions as well, which is, let's try to increase inter-Africa trade, focus on regional value chains, let's do beneficiation, focus on domestic resource mobilization. I fully endorse that. In fact, I'd like to have some of your slides, because there's some information which is inter-country comparisons, which I would like to have at the back of my pocket. So
no, they are free of charge, I can tell you.
And don't charge me for that. Yeah. Then still on Hanan's presentation on the health sector, we as Zimbabwe have been very aggressive and bold in response to the declining ODA on the health sector. We have a whole bouquet of revenue-raising measures. The first order of business is HIV/AIDS. So we have an AIDS levy, which has been running for a while now. We said we're a pioneer, and I'm determined to protect it going forward. So it's 3% of income for corporates and individuals, and it's really been helpful. That's one. 2, we've also increased the sin taxes on alcohol and gambling and cigarettes, all targeting the health sector. including the drug scourge, which is emerging among the youth. It's a big issue in Africa now. Our youth are beginning to take more drugs, and they have all mental health problems and so forth. So we shouldn't forget that bit. I've also introduced taxes on sugar content in beverages, and also taxes on fast foods. If you buy tacos in Zimbabwe, you pay a little bit more. And fried chicken, pizza, you pay a little bit more to support the health sector. And also introduced a levy on airtime and so forth. So we've got this bouquet of taxes all designed to deal with the gap, and we should be able to close the gap. We're determined to close the gap so that we don't want this ODA decline to be an issue at all. Let me now transition to the presentation by Admasu on the private sector support. And I agree with him. Again, I endorse the presentation that African-based financial institutions, starting with the AFDB, they need our support as the key shareholders. We are the AAA institutions as governments in our own continent, in our own country, so I agree with that comment. So really need all our support, and we'll do everything we can. This changes in the regulatory environment globally, it is quite an irritation. It is unfair, but it's not obvious how we fight it. But maybe we need to get together and think of strategies of how to deal with this, so that we are not downgraded as an African financial institution. For Zimbabwe specifically, we rely on you, because I have got arrears with ASAT. So there's a limit to how much she can give me money. So I come to you, and you've been forthcoming, because I don't have terrible arrears with you. So you have less constraints as well. So we need to support you to support us. There's an issue that was on your slide, but you didn't talk about that, Masu, which is venture capital finance. I'm particularly very passionate about it, to a point where, as the Minister of Finance, I'm funding a national venture fund. There's only one that exists. It is funded by the government. So I've said that, look, I will fund it for the next 3 years. After 3 years, we divest. We try then to crowd in the pension funds and other institutions, so that government shareholding in the National Venture Fund drops to below 30%. Without this, it's very difficult to raise risk capital in Africa. We have to be involved as governments. I wanted to say, I don't know if my colleagues, ministers, share this view, but it's my very strong view, and we are doing it. And I'm hands-on on this National Venture Fund. Then something else that I think has surprised me is that we also, as governments, we shouldn't think that innovation also just rests with the private sector. Where we can intervene, especially around our tax breaks and so forth, let's do it. I've been very surprised by the success we have enjoyed in Zimbabwe on real estate investment trusts, REITs. It's amazing. I'm seeing shopping malls everywhere. Now there's 2 hospitals coming up, we have 3 hotels coming up, all on the back of REITs. And we've gone the whole 9 yards. These REITs are listed with 2 types. One is listed in the domestic currency bourse. The other is listed on the US dollar bourse in Victoria Falls. And it's been amazing. We also introduced exchange-traded funds and tried to incentivize those, again, to boost capital markets. My point is, we should be forceful in supporting capital markets to develop. You'll be amazed at the response the private sector will give you. And another issue I want to add is on climate shocks. This has been also an area of surprise for us, and in the sense that we had 2 climate shocks since I became minister. And we started off slowly and bought sovereign insurance from ARC. And this has been hugely helpful. So in the last drought last year, we were able to cover 50% of the district in Zimbabwe in terms of cash transfers when this insurance paid out after the assessment. And we're going further. We now want to take insurance and encourage our small-scale farmers to take insurance at a micro level. We ran a pilot. They pay something like $15, in terms of the premium, and then the payout is of the order of $300. And we've been running this. We've been working with the IFC and others. The point I'm saying that when it comes to climate shocks, let's not forget working with African institutions that are providing climate insurance to deal with the vagaries of weather. Then finally, on sovereign wealth funds, I'm also a very strong believer in promoting a sovereign wealth fund. This is simple. If you look at the government balance sheet, in fact, we don't have a balance sheet. The balance sheet only has liabilities. We know what our domestic debt is, what our external debt is, but we don't know what our assets look like. We don't know. We have so many buildings, we have no value on those buildings. We have SOEs, state-owned enterprises, there's no proper valuation. So if you've got an instrument like a sovereign wealth fund, it will force you to build the asset side of your balance sheet. If you combine that with asset-based, what do you call it, this IPSAS framework, asset-based accounting, which forces you to value buildings, within 3 years, governments can have a balance sheet. And suddenly, a country that had a low rating, because it only understood its liabilities, but not the assets, will have a better rating, because now you have built the asset base, so now we have a real balance sheet that balances. So really encourage us to look seriously at this sovereign wealth fund, and also just go beyond the resource-based sovereign wealth fund where we take into account our oil or mineral revenues. Consider most of your state-owned enterprises. Ethiopia has done that, Zimbabwe has done that, I think Rwanda has also done that. We're all copying Temasek in Singapore. We're all copying Temasek. So I wanted to end on this point, and thank you for the discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, really, for mentioning this and the balance sheet that is not balanced, and also bringing the point of rates, the real estate investment trust, which is very, very quick win, I would say. And as you could see, is combining a lot of things. As a minister, as a professor, and also as the chief economist of the ADB, he uses all the, everything that he has, all the tools that he has. Now, before I understand that the minister from Mauritania has a very quick engagement, but we thought that maybe you could share your ideas, Honourable Minister. You know that you are chairing the African Union last year, very, very important. You led us into the whole entire year, and we hope that also going forward, you'll be playing a very big role. Please go ahead, Honourable Minister. Thank you so much for coming as well.
Thank you so much, Clever. And I would like also to thank Hanan Morsi for the excellent presentation. So now that tariffs will affect trade dynamics, raise costs for consumers, and disrupt supply chain. I mean, to address this issue, we need to provide a response to a very big question. How can we rebuild resilience inside Africa by boosting trade between African countries, but also between African countries and the rest of the world? In other terms, how should we do to accelerate and to boost the implementation of the AFCFTA? And what are the main challenges we have to address in this area? Then we have to focus on the most impacted sectors. We know that agriculture and manufacturing are the main impacted sectors because of this new tariff war. And finally, I think we have to rethink the African financial institution, African financial architecture. I listened, Tadesse talked about the need to provide private sector in Africa with guarantees, with proper guarantees, but also to facilitate business inside our country. And we know that the African Development Bank is well placed to play this role, but without a strong coordination between AFDB and the other African institutions like Afrexim Bank, TBD, and all other institutions, we will not be able to provide a strong and effective response to our private sector and our economic sectors. And Africa will continue to face a huge impact or huge challenges on this new tariff war. Thank you so much. I have to leave, as you mentioned it, because of another appointment. Thank you so much.
No, thank you very much. The point that you mentioned of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is extremely important, and also creating resilience. I think that's where we need to, and that's what the president of TDB was also talking about. Very, very important. But at this point now, thank you so much, really, for your contribution. Nigeria, Honorable Minister, Nigeria is a big country. Nigeria is a big population. We need your bailout. You have to help Africa. So how do you get us out of this situation when
Thank you very much,
microphone
Chair.
cannot talk, for Nigeria, a very important country?
And thank you, Dr. Hanamosi, for putting this all-important high-level dialogue together. Let me focus our attention by using, of course, an example from Nigeria. We saw the slide regarding health spending. Quite insightful, quite discouraging in a way, the extent of our dependency. Now, around April, I think, was it April 2nd, where the reciprocal tariff regime was announced. Before that, in fact, the retreat from funding the health sector, from funding by USAID in particular, was announced. And immediately, our very capable Minister for Health and coordinating Minister of Social Welfare in Nigeria, the very well-known Dr. Mohammed Ali Pate, immediately sat down with his team. And in Nigeria, we are benefiting from $800 million per annum of support, of financing, of help in the, from USAID for treatment of tuberculosis, HIV, and malaria. But the interesting thing is this, and this is the lesson for us. First of all, we can't expect that somebody else will be taking care of us, will be providing us with medicines ad infinitum. So the decision by the authorities in America, well, was a wake-up call. The specifics of that support, when we analyzed it, we came to the conclusion, and the health authorities in Nigeria came to us as the financial and fiscal authorities and said, you know, with $200 million, we can replace that $800 million because we can buy cheaper. We can buy and process and administer more efficiently. And we can also cut out the very expensive sort of personnel, administrative, and logistic costs that were spent in our name through that aid program, essentially. So I think the lesson for us is that we need to do more of that. Yes, we need to trade with each other, our regional blocs. We need to really make use of as the group managing director of TDB has said, we need to trade more with each other. We need to make use of the liquidity available to facilitate that. But we need to also give ourselves a mindset of self-reliance, of looking inwards. working with each other and depending on ourselves more. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Honourable Minister. Really, you are right when you say that United States action was a wake-up call, and it's a good one. There'll be short-term pain, but it's going to be solution. And we need to look inward in terms of our domestic resource mobilization, in terms of looking at our market, the African market, and also in terms of also looking at alternatives. So really, really thank you very much for this important suggestion. Now it's open to everybody. We know that you all have great ideas from what you have heard. Is there anybody who wants to come in? Yes, the Insurance Minister wants to go in for the second time. You can even go in for the third time.
I couldn't resist, the comments from my colleague from Nigeria. In fact, I want to send a team to Nigeria, Minister, to come and see how we were able to, just with 200 million, deal with an issue that you thought was 800 million because of you're dealing with cost-cutting and efficiency issues. We are realizing the same as well, that the previous system was expensive, and through bulk procurement, we can reduce. But I really want to send a team to come and take a look, because that drop is very, very dramatic. One of the systems we're looking into is what you call a consignment system, where at the end of where the doctor is dealing with the patient, they use a system where the doctor's name is known, the patient is known, where what they were treated, the drug that was prescribed, whether it's Panadol, I don't know, whatever else, amlodipine, is known, and that system is able to go all the way back into the warehouse, linked to the warehouse where drugs are also dispatched from through the pharmacy. So it goes all the way back. That way, we found that we think that we can cut back on the cost by as much as 50%. But I'm keen on your system, and I'll send it to you.
Thank you very much. So Zimbabwe is your first client, and maybe you get much more. Colleagues, it's open. We need any ideas. I see, Dr. Monique, you've been at the very, very top in terms of the African Union. You're the deputy chairperson, accumulated so many ideas. Do you have any comment? Okay. Yes. Anybody else? If not, I want to just bring it back, maybe after the president again for the third round, and then we come back again to Dr. Mosi. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. I thought I would pick up on the very interesting theme of cost effectiveness and how that can create opportunities, because yesterday I had a very interesting meeting with one of the ministers of finance from our region, and he was telling me we're finally going to cut the ribbon on this new hospital that you co-financed with us. And that started around 5 years ago. There were some interruptions. Nobody was willing to step into that project. We were the only ones who started. The government had put a certain amount in, but nobody else was willing to come in and pick up on some of the gaps. And I had a lovely moment where the minister told me yesterday that after many years of showing and demonstrating that he was moving ahead with a willing partner, others have come to the party. And he's saying to me, you put 25 million euros into this hospital. He says, I put about 25 as well. Right. He says, every year I'm gonna save 40 million euro from health tourism going outside of the country. Yeah. You know, so it's another way of getting savings. Exactly. And I don't think enough African countries have taken advantage of specialized financing available for hospitals and pharmaceutical projects that came out of the unexpected development of COVID. But there's several of us sitting with a lot of facilities. It's another way to reduce costs out of the economy. It may not be coming out of the fiscus because these are households and private individuals going on health tourism outside. If it's for a heart transplant, fine. We may not be able to do it in Africa so easily, but there's many other tertiary level medical interventions we can do within Africa, and it doesn't have to be on taxpayer money. It can be us blending MDB money, bank finance with PPP formats. So I think that's another area of opportunity that African countries can take advantage of. We spend so much money on air travel, hotels, as well as hospitals far away from Africa. for things that are not so complicated, honestly. So that's another area of opportunity I thought I would flag.
Thank you very much, my good friend. You see, I think what we lack is sharing experience, and I think we'll start compiling some of the best experiences that we are seeing here. It's good to learn from each other. So now, coming back to you, I can say that, by the way, organizing this kind of conference, I had zero role in terms of organizing it. It was done by Dr. Mosi, came up with the idea and said we need to share this information to the rest of the world, of the African countries. Thank you very much, really, for that. And now the heat was on you, so go ahead.
Thank you very much, and I'm really, grateful for our colleagues here, and for President Tadeusz, and for my dear sister Hasu too, for really bringing in, how they can help us and what we need to do to help them help us, which is very important. And thank you for the very candid. This is the whole purpose of these meetings, is to make sure that we are speaking candidly, openly, and focusing on what needs to change, because that's how change happens. So on a number of issues were raised, I think, that are really very critical. So we've heard on the issues of regulatory changes. This is so key now, for a simple reason, is we're not getting money, so let's at least make sure that we get the regulatory changes that can create the space for us to actually get the financing. And it becomes, you cannot say no to everything. So especially if you link this issue, not just in terms of our needs, but we need to place it in the context of global financial stability. The same language that, gets talked and used by the big players, it actually, the type of things that they have global financial stability. If it's done to maintain global financial stability, but it hinders development, the world will actually pay for it in a few years. So I think this is one of the things I just want to assure you that it's one of the areas that we are working in. Together with AFDB, we are helping with the document for the cost of capital for the G20 working group, and it's one of the areas that, from ECA side, we're ensuring that this is there, and then also from the perspective of the Africa G20 panel of experts, it's one of the things that was discussed that will need to be there as well. So we'll do our best, and please, let's remain engaged and ensure that we are including what matters and what can get results. Also, could not agree more in terms of capital market developments. I just want to say that this is how I got to know AFDB. This is a disclosure. So the first time I got interaction with AFDB was when we did, local capital market joint report, and I was at the time at EBRD. We were doing it with AFDB, all the other financial institutions, World Bank, IMF, and others. And it was a very interesting example, and we did it for all, after the Arab Spring, countries. I think we need to do this together and with others more often, and for more of African countries. So it's something that we can perhaps talk about and pursue more. But it really, the diagnosis of what needs to be done, what is hindering it in some countries, it's regulation, actually, that prevents, say, pension funds from investing in capital market. And you cannot develop the capital market if you don't have your own pension funds able to invest in it. So, doing more of that diagnosis would really help us. And then for our, financial institutions to help and invest in the capital market developments. I wanted to mention something that was a bit, perhaps I hinted to it, but I didn't explicitly elaborate on it in the spring meeting, which is the issue of how you're treated. I am not sure if you've looked at the new guidance note on arrears, lending into arrears by the IMF. So basically, now it's specifically mentioned. Before it was by discretion, more or less. They decide who they're gonna treat how. Now the criteria is it need to have 50% or more of the shareholdings of the IMF, which basically means, the quota distribution. It means that you need to have certain countries for it, of whether, US or Europe and the major shareholders to actually qualify to be treated as one, which is very interesting, So this is the background, and this is one of the things that we need to look into, what it means, does it make sense, what do we need to do? Another thing that perhaps I haven't mentioned before, and we've been helping in, and I believe it's a solution, the pooled procurement for pharmaceutical, the Pan-African one that was done, so that it helped us reduce the cost of buying the medicines. It started in COVID, and now we've helped set it up, and now it's the Africa Center of Disease Control that's taking it over. The whole idea is that we get these medicines cheaper because we have a bigger negotiating power, but more importantly, it's for also our pharmaceutical sector and companies, because actually, in many times, they're able to produce the same medicines, but at lower cost, especially like the generic version. So we need to invest, we need to be the change we want to see. So I think it's one of these areas that need to be done. And another, just one, I'm glad to hear from Masoud that, there is financing for health, because my experience, and let me quote the two examples of going to board with financing of health. There was one at EBRD where it was turned down because it's private sector and major shareholders believe it should be done only by the government. And there was another one that I'll remember vividly for the rest of my life, which is the one that happened at AFDB board for financing Center of Disease Control 2 months before COVID hit and after Ebola, that was turned down. So historically, it has not been the case. If we see that this is progressing, that would be fantastic. But if not, I think a lot of advocacy and change need to happen so we ensure that these type of examples never happen again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mosi. Now I have my good friend here, the minister from Guinea. I want to acknowledge you for being here. But because we are already over time, I'll find a way of buying you coffee and you pay next year. And then I can tell you everything that has been discussed here. But thank you very, very much for coming. And this has been a very wonderful discussion. And really, really, all the thanks go to our host. This young lady is very, very important, hosting us here. Not only that, but also contributing to the whole entire discussion. ADB has done, I think yesterday we were all in the room when you were talking about what you have done. Sometimes we feel, can I also do the same? This is too, of course, wishful thinking, but you've done quite a lot. So really, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tadesse, for sharing that experience. I think it's very, very important to document it so that we can be able to know exactly how to work together. And I think what this one brings in is that we need to be closer to each other. The ministers, the institutions that are supporting them, ourselves, so that we can really be able to continue speaking the same language, but also learning from each other. And I think we can make really a big difference by being together rather than working in a scattered manner. But I thank everyone who has who made your time. We know that it was too early in the morning for important people like you, but for your time, I think this was worth it. Thank you so much, really. See you next time.